The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Ridgefield, a sprawling military base tucked into the rolling hills of rural Kentucky. Captain Sarah Mitchell stood in the parking lot of the base commissary, her uniform pressed sharp, her boots polished to a mirror shine. At 34 years old, she had served her country for 12 years of dedication, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment. Yet as she walked through the base that Tuesday morning, most people looked right through her. This wasn't unusual. Sarah had grown accustomed to being invisible. She made her way toward the command building for her regular assignment, a position she'd held for 3 years. She was a logistics coordinator, a job she was exceptionally good at. She managed supply chains, oversaw inventory, and solved problems that kept the base running smoothly. Her work was essential, but it was also quiet. It didn't make headlines. It didn't earn medals. It was the kind of work that nobody noticed unless something went wrong. At the security checkpoint near the administrative wing, a young private named Coleman barely glanced at her credentials before waving her through. He was on his phone, chewing gum, not really paying attention. Sarah had made a mental note of this before, the lack of attention to protocol, but she had learned not to say anything. The last time she'd mentioned a security concern to someone above her, she'd been labeled a tattletale. A woman who couldn't let things go. Sarah's boss, Major Thomas Hartwell, was waiting for her in the conference room. He was a commanding presence, tall, imposing, with a voice that filled a room. He was also the kind of man who still believed that women in the military were an experiment that hadn't quite worked out. He didn't say this directly, of course. He was too smart for that. But his actions spoke volumes. "Mitchell," he said, not looking up from his desk. "I need you to organize the inventory for the new shipment coming in today. I'm assigning the task to you because frankly, I know it won't be fouled up. Not like when I gave it to Lieutenant Richards last month." Sarah nodded. She didn't mention that Lieutenant Richards was a man, or that his fouled-up inventory had been blamed on unclear instructions, not incompetence. She simply said, "Yes, sir. I'll have the full report ready by end of business." "Good. You're reliable, Mitchell. That's your strength. You're not leadership material, but you're the kind of soldier we need in support roles." The words stung. They always did. But Sarah had learned to swallow her hurt and her anger. She'd learned to smile politely and get back to work. That's what a good soldier did. That's what she'd been told. Over the next few hours, Sarah threw herself into her work with the kind of intensity that only years of being underestimated can fuel. She walked the warehouse, checked every manifest, verified every box. She found 3 discrepancies, 3 items that were labeled incorrectly, 3 problems that could have caused serious issues down the line. She documented everything meticulously. At around 2 in the afternoon, while conducting her inventory sweep, Sarah noticed something odd. There was a locked storage room in the warehouse that she'd never really paid attention to before. It was marked with a red sign, "Authorized personnel only." But today, the door was slightly ajar. Sarah knew she should report it to her supervisor. That's what protocol said to do. But she also knew how those reports went. She'd be thanked politely and then quietly patronized. Someone would say something like, "That's sweet that you noticed, but don't worry your head about it, we'll take care of it." They would take care of it on their own schedule, in their own way, with no real urgency. Sarah made a different choice. She glanced around the warehouse. It was mostly empty. The other personnel were on break. She had maybe 5 minutes of privacy. She walked over to the door and peered inside. What she saw made her blood run cold. Inside the storage room were dozens of boxes. High-grade equipment. Military-grade technology. The kind of stuff that was supposed to be tracked with extreme precision. But these boxes, they weren't in the system. At least, they hadn't been in the system when she checked the inventory 15 minutes ago. Sarah's mind raced. This could mean several things. It could be a mistake. It could be a new shipment that hadn't been logged yet. It could be legitimate. But it could also be something else entirely. And Sarah, despite everything, despite being underestimated, despite being overlooked, despite years of swallowing her pride, had a conscience that wouldn't let her ignore it. She made a photograph of the room on her phone. Just one. Quick. Careful. She closed the door and walked back to the inventory station. That night, Sarah sat in her small apartment off base and thought about what to do. She had a photograph of unauthorized equipment in a restricted area. She had no context for why it was there. She had only questions. She thought about reporting it through proper channels. But proper channels moved slowly. And proper channels, in her experience, sometimes protected the wrong people. Instead, she did something that would change everything. She called the Army's anonymous tip line. She reported what she'd seen, gave the location, and hung up the phone. She told herself it was the right thing to do. She told herself that the truth would come out, that it would all be fine, that she had done her duty. 3 days later, Sarah arrived at work to find the warehouse cordoned off with yellow tape. Military police were everywhere. Officers in serious expressions huddled in corners, talking in low voices. The entire mood of the base had shifted, there was tension in the air, the kind that came with official investigations. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She went through her usual morning routine, trying to act normal, trying not to draw attention. But by mid-morning, she was called into Major Hartwell's office. This time, he wasn't alone. There was a man in a colonel's uniform sitting across from his desk. His eyes were sharp, calculating. His name was Colonel James Patterson, and he was the commander of security for Fort Ridgefield. "Captain Mitchell," the colonel said, standing up to shake her hand. His grip was firm, professional. "I understand you were conducting inventory in the warehouse when we discovered some irregularities." "I was, sir," Sarah said carefully. "Though I finished my inventory the day before the yellow tape went up." "Did you notice anything unusual?" Patterson asked. Sarah hesitated for only a moment. This was her chance to be honest, to be the soldier who had integrity. "Yes, sir. I noticed a storage room that was marked as restricted. The door was ajar. I reported what I saw through the proper anonymous channels." Hartwell's face went pale. Patterson's expression didn't change. "You reported it anonymously?" "Yes, sir. I felt it was important, but I wasn't certain how serious it was. I thought the anonymous line was the appropriate channel." "And you didn't tell Major Hartwell here?" Sarah glanced at her boss. His jaw was clenched. She knew that look. She knew she'd made a mistake in his eyes. "No, sir. I went directly to the anonymous tip line as that seemed like the most objective approach." Patterson nodded slowly. "Well, Captain Mitchell, I need you to understand something. What you reported, and what we found, is extremely serious. Those boxes contain sensitive military equipment. Equipment that should have been logged and tracked. Equipment that was being stored without proper authorization. Do you know why it was there, sir?" Sarah asked. Patterson exchanged a glance with Hartwell. Something passed between them, a look of understanding, or perhaps warning. "That's what we're investigating," Patterson said. "And I'm going to need you to be available for interviews over the next few weeks. Can you do that?" "Of course, sir. Whatever I can do to help." "Good. Then I suggest you don't talk to anyone about this. Not your fellow officers, not your friends, not your family. This is an ongoing investigation, and we need to keep everything confidential." "Understood?" "Understood, sir." When she left the office, Sarah felt a mixture of emotions. She'd done the right thing. She knew that. But she also felt Hartwell's anger radiating from behind his closed office door. She felt the weight of every eye in the hallway on her. She was no longer invisible. She was the woman who had reported something. The woman who had caused this disruption. The woman who had made trouble. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah was interviewed repeatedly. The same questions, asked in different ways. What did you see? When did you see it? Why did you go in the room? Why didn't you report it to your supervisor? The interviews were thorough, and Sarah answered every question honestly. She had done nothing wrong. She had reported a genuine security concern. But something was happening. She could feel it. Her colleagues started treating her differently. Conversations would stop when she walked into a room. People who had always greeted her with a nod now looked away. At the commissary, Sarah found herself sitting alone. She'd always sat alone, really, but it felt different now. It felt intentional. Then came the rumors. Sarah heard them in whispers. People said she'd fabricated the whole thing for attention. People said she was trying to undermine the command structure. People said she was a troublemaker, someone who couldn't be trusted. And worst of all, people started saying that maybe she was involved in whatever the equipment situation was, maybe she was being investigated too. None of it was true. But truth didn't seem to matter. 3 weeks into the investigation, Sarah was called back into Patterson's office. This time, his expression was grave. "We've identified the source of the unauthorized equipment," he said. "It appears to be connected to a supply chain issue that goes back several months. We've traced it to a contractor, and we're working with federal authorities to determine if there was intentional mishandling of military assets." "Have you made arrests, sir?" Sarah asked. "Not yet. That's not my department. But I wanted you to know that your report was crucial. It helped us uncover this much faster than we would have otherwise. You did good work, Captain." Sarah felt a wave of relief. She had done the right thing. The investigation was proceeding. Justice would be served. However, Patterson continued, "I also need to tell you something else. Your name is going to come up in the official report. There's no way around it. You're the officer who discovered the discrepancy. And while I believe your actions were appropriate, I want you to be prepared for the fact that some people may not see it that way." "What do you mean, sir?" Patterson leaned back in his chair. "I mean, Captain, that sometimes when you expose a problem, people shoot the messenger. Be careful. Watch yourself. And if anyone gives you trouble, I want you to report it directly to me." Sarah nodded, but inside, something dark was beginning to grow. Something that felt like dread. The investigation concluded with the arrest of 3 civilian contractors and 2 junior enlisted men. They were charged with conspiracy to sell military equipment on the black market. It was a significant bust. The colonel held a press conference where he praised the base's security protocols and mentioned that the discovery had been made through thorough inventory procedures and vigilant personnel. He never mentioned Sarah's name. But everyone on the base knew. And they were starting to make her pay for it. Sarah's work assignments changed. Tasks that had once been routine, simple logistics work that she handled with ease, were now delegated to her with reluctance. Hartwell barely spoke to her anymore. And when he did, his tone was cold, clipped, dismissive. "Mitchell, I need these reports filed. And do it right this time. No mistakes." It was an insult. Sarah had never filed a report incorrectly in her entire career. But she said nothing. She filed the reports. She did everything that was asked of her. She was the perfect soldier, the kind that followed orders and didn't complain. But whispers continued. Sarah learned that Hartwell was telling people in private meetings that Sarah had compromised base security by her actions. He said she should never have gone into that storage room. He said she should have reported it through proper channels, to him. He said her decision to use the anonymous tip line showed poor judgment and a lack of respect for the chain of command. The story twisted in the retelling. By the time it reached Sarah's ears, it had become something different. She wasn't a vigilant officer who had caught a security breach. She was a glory-seeking captain who had gone rogue, who had violated protocols, who had made Major Hartwell look bad. One morning in August, Sarah was called to the Human Resources office. She sat across from a woman named Mrs. Eleanor Chen, who oversaw personnel matters for the base. "Captain Mitchell," Chen said, sliding a folder across her desk, "I need to discuss a complaint that was filed against you." Sarah's heart sank. "A complaint, ma'am?" "Yes. It's regarding your conduct during the recent investigation. The complainant alleges that you violated protocol by entering a restricted area without authorization, and that you then circumvented the chain of command by reporting the incident anonymously instead of to your superior officer." "That's not accurate, ma'am." The door was ajar. I looked inside. I saw something concerning, and I reported it through the proper anonymous channels. "That's your account," Chen said. She wasn't unkind, exactly, but she wasn't warm either. However, Major Hartwell's account differs slightly. He says you have a history of overstepping boundaries and that this incident reflects a larger pattern of insubordination. Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. "With all due respect, ma'am, I have never been insubordinate. I have received satisfactory performance evaluations for 12 years. I have never been disciplined. This is retaliation for doing my job." "That's a serious accusation," Chen said carefully. "But without evidence of intentional retaliation, I can't prove it. What I can do is place a note in your file regarding this incident. It will indicate that there was a complaint filed and an investigation conducted. It will not affect your current rank or position, but it may impact future promotions." Sarah left the HR office feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She had done everything right. She had reported a genuine security concern through appropriate channels. She had been honest in interviews. She had followed every protocol. And for that, she was being punished. That night, Sarah sat on her couch in her small apartment and did something she hadn't done in years. She cried. Not dainty, polite tears. Deep, soul-wrenching sobs that came from a place of injustice that had been buried inside her since the moment she'd joined the military. She cried for every time she'd been overlooked. For every promotion that had gone to someone less qualified because he was a man. For every time her ideas had been stolen and presented by a male colleague who was lauded for his brilliance. She cried for the years of swallowing her pride, of accepting less, of making herself smaller so that men around her could feel bigger. And then, at midnight, sitting in the darkness of her apartment, Sarah made a decision. She was going to fight back. Not with anger or aggression, but with the only weapon she had, the truth. Sarah began documenting everything. She pulled out performance evaluations from the past 5 years. She reviewed her work history. She gathered emails, dozens of them, that showed her superior work ethic and her dedication. She also documented the pattern of retaliation that had begun after the discovery in the warehouse. She created a timeline. She noted every incident. The cold treatment from colleagues. The negative remarks made behind closed doors that had gotten back to her. The change in her work assignments. The complaint filed to HR. The note in her personnel file. It was a clear pattern. A case. In September, Sarah made an appointment with the base's equal opportunity officer, a woman named Captain Lisa Rodriguez. Rodriguez was younger than Sarah, but she had a reputation for taking complaints seriously. Sarah brought her documentation. She presented her case calmly and professionally. She explained what had happened, what she had discovered, how she had reported it, and the subsequent treatment she had received. Rodriguez listened carefully, taking notes. When Sarah finished, there was a long silence. "This is serious," Rodriguez finally said. "If what you're describing is accurate, it's retaliation, and retaliation is illegal. It violates both military regulations and federal law." "I know, ma'am. And I don't want special treatment. I just want to be treated fairly. I want this note removed from my file. And I want Major Hartwell to be held accountable for the retaliation. Rodriguez nodded. I'm going to open a formal investigation into your complaint. This may get complicated, Captain. Are you prepared for that? These investigations can be unpleasant. They can create tension. They can affect your career. Sarah thought about the past 6 months. She thought about sitting alone in the commissary. She thought about the cold looks and the whispered conversations. She thought about the injustice of being punished for doing the right thing. My career has already been affected, she said quietly. I'd rather face whatever comes next than let this stand. Rodriguez's investigation took 3 months. During that time, Sarah was interviewed multiple times. So were other officers and enlisted personnel. Military police conducted interviews. Records were reviewed. Everything was documented and analyzed. Sarah continued to do her job. She went to work. She completed her assignments. She didn't talk about the investigation, she was under strict orders not to. But everyone knew. The investigation had become the talk of the base. Some people looked at Sarah with sympathy. Others looked at her with contempt. She'd become a symbol of discord, of disruption, of someone who couldn't just accept the way things were. Then, in December, Rodriguez called her back into her office. We've completed the investigation, she said. And Captain Mitchell, the evidence supports your complaint entirely. Rodriguez outlined her findings. There was clear documentation of retaliation. Major Hartwell's own emails, when reviewed, showed him expressing anger about Sarah's report. He had instructed other officers to be less cooperative with her. He had made disparaging remarks about her competence. The complaint he filed to HR had been based on a mischaracterization of her actions. We're recommending disciplinary action against Major Hartwell, Rodriguez said. Additionally, the note in your file will be removed. Your record will be cleared. And we're recommending that you be considered for a promotion within the next evaluation cycle. Sarah should have felt triumphant. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt empty. What will happen to Major Hartwell, she asked. He'll likely be reassigned. Given the severity of the retaliation, a court-martial is being considered, but that determination will be made above my pay grade. Sarah nodded slowly. She'd won. She'd proven her case. She'd been right all along. But the damage had been done. She'd spent 6 months under a cloud. She'd lost the trust and friendship of people she'd worked with for years. She'd been labeled a troublemaker. Even if those labels were being officially removed now, they would follow her. They always did. As she left Rodriguez's office, Sarah realized something: winning wasn't the same as justice. And justice wasn't the same as redemption. There was still one more piece of the puzzle. One more truth that needed to come to light. For months after Rodriguez's investigation concluded, Sarah was sitting in her office when she received an unexpected email. It was from a journalist named David Martinez who worked for the Army Times, a respected military publication. The email was brief: Captain Mitchell, I've been investigating the equipment smuggling case that was discovered at Fort Ridgefield earlier this year. I believe you played a key role in the discovery. I'd like to speak with you about your experience. Please call me if you're willing to talk. Sarah stared at the email for a long time. Her first instinct was to ignore it. She'd been told to keep quiet about the investigation. The official channels were still processing everything. But something had changed in Sarah over the past year. She'd learned that staying quiet meant accepting injustice. Staying quiet meant letting powerful people define the narrative. She called David Martinez. The conversation lasted for over an hour. Sarah told him everything. She told him about discovering the storage room. She told him about the anonymous report. She told him about the investigation. And most importantly, she told him about the retaliation that had followed, not to herself necessarily, but to the broader pattern of how whistleblowers were treated in the military. "What happened to you is important," Martinez said when she finished. "Not just your personal experience, but what it says about military culture. If officers who report genuine security concerns are punished, then the system breaks down. People will stop reporting things. And that puts everyone at risk." 3 weeks later, the Army Times published a feature article. It was titled, "Whistleblower Punished: How Fort Ridgefield Retaliated Against the Officer Who Exposed Equipment Smuggling." The article was comprehensive. It detailed Sarah's discovery, her report, the investigation, and the subsequent retaliation. It included interviews with Rodriguez and other officers. It also included a statement from Colonel Patterson commending Sarah's actions and condemning the retaliation she had faced. Most importantly, it included Hartwell's information, a statement from military officials indicating that Major Thomas Hartwell had been relieved of his command and was facing a court-martial for abuse of authority and retaliation against a subordinate officer. The article went viral in military circles. It was shared on social media. It was discussed in officers' clubs across the country. It became a conversation about accountability, about honesty, about what real military values actually meant. Within a week, Sarah was called to the office of the base commander, a general named Catherine Walsh. Walsh was a tall woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a formidable presence. "Captain Mitchell," Walsh said, "I've read the article. I've read the investigation reports. And I want to personally apologize for what happened to you on this base. That's not who we are. That's not what we stand for." "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah said. "More than that," Walsh continued, "I'm recommending you for a promotion to major. Your actions in discovering the equipment smuggling and your courage in standing up to retaliation exemplify the best of military service. You deserve recognition." Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of pain or frustration. They were tears of vindication. Of being seen. Of being recognized not for what she could do quietly in the background, but for her strength, her integrity, her willingness to stand up for what was right. "Thank you, ma'am. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep serving with the same integrity you've shown," Walsh said. "And say you'll help us change the culture around here. Because what happened to you, the underestimation, the retaliation, the assumption that a woman can only be good at support roles, that has to change. And people like you are how that change happens." 3 months later, Sarah was promoted to major. She attended a formal ceremony where her promotion was announced in front of the entire base. The same people who had whispered about her, who had treated her coldly, who had dismissed her, they applauded. Some of them genuinely. Some of them not. Sarah didn't care what their applause meant. She knew the truth about herself. She had walked into a restricted area. She had discovered something that shouldn't have been hidden. She had reported it honestly. She had been punished for it. And she had fought back. She had won. But more than that, she had become something she had never been before, she had become visible. Not as the quiet soldier in the background. But as a woman of courage. A woman of strength. A woman who would not be diminished. 1 year later, Sarah received a letter. It was from a young female second lieutenant at Fort Ridgefield named Angela Torres. The letter read, "Major Mitchell, I want to thank you. I came into the military ready to work hard and do my part. But I was ready to accept being overlooked, being underestimated, being told that I couldn't lead because I was a woman. Then I heard about what you did. I read about how you reported the truth, how you stood up to retaliation, how you didn't just accept injustice. You showed me that we don't have to accept those things. You showed me that we can demand better. I'm going to demand better. Thank you for that." Sarah read that letter many times. She kept it in a frame on her office wall. And every time she looked at it, she remembered something important, that standing up for the truth matters. That integrity matters. That one person's courage can ripple outward and inspire others. She had walked into a restricted area. The military had not taken it lightly. But in the end, that moment of choosing truth over comfort, of choosing justice over acceptance, had changed everything. For her. And perhaps, in some small way, for everyone else who came after her.